On Tuesday afternoon, July 28, 2026, at 4:27 local time, the ground beneath Japan's Kumamoto prefecture shook with enough force to collapse buildings, derail a train, and trigger a tsunami advisory along two separate stretches of coastline. Within hours, a shopping mall packed with shoppers had partially collapsed after what officials believe was a gas explosion. Soldiers were being deployed by the hundreds, and a death toll that started in single digits climbed steadily through the following day. This is what's actually confirmed so far about the earthquake that struck southern Japan this week, the damage it caused, the ongoing rescue effort, and why this specific region has now been hit hard twice in exactly 1 decade. If you want accurate, sourced reporting on developing events like this, rather than exaggeration, subscribe now, because this situation is still actively unfolding, and the full toll isn't yet known. Let's start with the basic facts of the earthquake itself, because getting the numbers right matters, especially in the immediate aftermath of an event like this, when initial reports and final figures can differ. The Japan Meteorological Agency recorded a preliminary magnitude of 7. 1 for the quake, centered at a shallow depth of just over 6 miles, roughly 12 miles south of Kumamoto City, on the southern island of Kyushu, a city with a population of around 700,000 people. The U.S. Geological Survey later revised its own measurement down to magnitude 6.8, a normal part of the process, as more seismic data comes in and gets analyzed in the hours following any major quake. Despite that difference in magnitude readings between the two agencies, Japan's own Shindo intensity scale, which measures the actual force of shaking felt at the surface rather than the quake's underlying energy, registered the highest possible level, a 7, in the hardest hit areas, reflecting just how violently the ground moved in the immediate vicinity of the epicenter. The quake struck at a time of day when it was always going to cause maximum disruption. Mid-afternoon on a weekday, with people out shopping, commuting, and working, a tsunami advisory was issued within minutes for the Ariake and Yatsushiro seas, warning of a wave as large as roughly 1 meter. Though that advisory was lifted before long, once monitoring confirmed the danger had passed. Bullet train services in the region were suspended immediately as a safety precaution, and some airport operations were disrupted as well, leaving passengers crowding stations like JR Hakata and Fukuoka as they waited for word on when services might resume. If a story built on verified, sourced reporting from outlets actually covering this on the ground is the kind of thing you want more of, drop a like on this video right now. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who'd get value out of it. To understand why an earthquake like this can happen in Japan at all, it helps to understand the country's underlying geology, because Japan sits directly atop one of the most seismically active regions on the entire planet. The country straddles the boundaries of several major tectonic plates, including the Pacific, Philippine Sea, and Eurasian plates, all constantly grinding against and sliding beneath one another along what's commonly known as the Pacific Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped zone circling much of the Pacific Ocean where the majority of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur. That constant tectonic pressure is precisely why Japan experiences roughly 1,500 to 2,000 earthquakes strong enough to be felt by people every single year, the overwhelming majority of them minor tremors that pass without causing any real damage at all. Kumamoto specifically sits near a network of active fault lines running through Kyushu, the same underlying fault system responsible for both this week's earthquake and the devastating 2016 sequence. A reminder that specific regions within an already earthquake-prone country can carry meaningfully elevated risk compared to the national average. The most serious single incident during the earthquake happened at the Aeon Mall shopping center in Kashima City, a facility that was, according to reports, bustling with thousands of people at the exact moment the quake struck. Japan's public broadcaster NHK reported that an explosion, likely caused by a gas leak triggered by the shaking, occurred on the second floor of the mall. An aerial footage broadcast afterward showed a collapsed ceiling and exposed internal structure at the site. Local fire officials confirmed that multiple people were trapped inside the mall in the hours immediately following the quake, and police in the city told a Japanese broadcaster there were, in their words, a lot of deaths at the mall, while cautioning that confirming an exact number would take time. Rescue teams, including members of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's Special Rescue Team, were flown in by helicopter to assist with the search. The mall wasn't the only site of serious structural damage. NHK reported that at least 12 buildings had collapsed across the affected area, with most of the incidents concentrated in the city of Yatsushiro in Kumamoto Prefecture, including at least 4 cases where people remained trapped inside collapsed structures. The exterior wall of a store collapsed in Kumamoto City itself. Pillars supporting a local shrine came down. At least 7 separate fires broke out across the prefecture in the aftermath of the shaking. And in a tragic specific incident at a factory in the affected region, a Vietnamese technical intern was killed after a crane collapsed on him during the earthquake, according to Vietnam's own government. 7 other Vietnamese technical interns working at the same factory were able to evacuate safely, though a Vietnamese woman married to one of the workers was injured when a wall collapsed nearby and was receiving hospital treatment. If you found these details as sobering as I did while researching this, drop a comment and let me know. It genuinely helps me figure out what to cover next. As for the human toll overall, the numbers have continued climbing in the days since the quake struck, which is normal and expected in the immediate aftermath of a disaster like this, as rescue crews continue working through damaged structures and communication with the hardest hit areas gradually improves. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi confirmed a death toll of 13 people as of Wednesday morning local time, a figure that had climbed to at least 18 confirmed dead by the most recent update available, according to local officials, with at least 62 people reported injured, 6 of them seriously. Officials have been direct that it remains unclear exactly how many people might still be missing, and that the overall total may continue to rise as search and rescue operations continue. Prime Minister Takaichi described the situation in blunt terms, stating plainly that there are people still waiting to be rescued, and that it remains a race against time for crews working through the wreckage. In response, the Japanese government moved quickly to deploy additional resources to the region. Prime Minister Takaichi announced that 300 members of the Japan Self-Defense Forces would be sent to southern Japan specifically to assist with disaster relief efforts, joining local firefighters, police, and emergency medical teams already working in the affected areas. Infrastructure damage compounded the difficulty of that response considerably. Kumamoto officials reported that nearly 34,900 homes remained without electricity in the aftermath of the quake, while roughly 15,000 homes were left without running water. Conditions that make both rescue operations and basic day-to-day survival significantly harder for residents in the affected communities, especially during Japan's hot summer months. Given Japan's history with major earthquakes, and specifically its history with nuclear safety concerns following the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and the meltdowns it triggered at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, one of the first questions raised after any significant Japanese earthquake understandably involves the status of nearby nuclear facilities. In this case, Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority confirmed in an emergency update that no abnormalities had been recorded at nearby nuclear facilities in the region, including plants at Ikita, Ginkai, and Sendai specifically. Japan's Nuclear Regulatory Authority separately informed the International Atomic Energy Agency that the Sendai nuclear power plant had not been damaged by the earthquake, and the IAEA confirmed it would continue monitoring the situation as a standard precaution without indicating any current cause for concern. It's also worth understanding 2 specific systems that almost certainly kept this week's death toll from climbing considerably higher, because Japan has spent decades building infrastructure specifically designed around the reality of living with frequent, powerful earthquakes. The country operates one of the most advanced earthquake early warning systems in the world, a network of seismometers capable of detecting an earthquake's initial, faster-moving waves and issuing an automated alert to phones, televisions, and public broadcast systems in the seconds before the slower, more destructive shaking waves actually arrive. Depending on the distance from the epicenter, that warning can provide anywhere from a few seconds to slightly over a minute of advance notice, enough time in many cases for people to take cover, for trains to automatically begin braking, and for critical infrastructure to shift into a safer operating mode before the worst shaking hits. Japan has also enforced some of the strictest earthquake-resistant building codes anywhere in the world since a series of major updates. Following the devastating 1995 Kobe earthquake, which killed more than 6,000 people and exposed serious weaknesses in structures built before those stricter standards were introduced, buildings constructed to modern Japanese seismic codes are specifically engineered to flex and absorb shaking rather than rigidly resist it, a design philosophy that has repeatedly demonstrated its value in reducing structural collapses during major earthquakes since those codes went into effect, even though, as this week's earthquake showed, that protection is not absolute, particularly for older structures or facilities where secondary hazards like gas leaks and resulting explosions can cause serious damage independent of the shaking itself. It's also worth understanding why this particular region of Japan carries such a specific, painful history with earthquakes like this one, because this isn't the first time Kumamoto has been hit hard. Back in April of 2016, the same general area was struck by a sequence of major earthquakes just over 24 hours apart, a magnitude 6.4 quake followed by an even larger magnitude 7. One quake, a pattern that seismologists later determined meant the first smaller earthquake, had actually been a foreshock warning of the larger one still to come. That 2016 sequence killed at least 9 people directly and injured more than 1,000, with most of the casualties concentrated in the town of Mashiki near the epicenter, where numerous houses collapsed and left roughly 7,700 people sheltering in evacuation centers in the aftermath. A researcher at Tohoku University at the time noted that distinguishing a foreshock from a main shock in real time is genuinely difficult, since there's no reliable way to know in the moment whether a given earthquake represents the main event or merely a warning sign of something larger still to come. A sobering reality that Kumamoto residents are now confronting for a second time within a single decade. That broader context matters because Japan itself experiences hundreds of earthquakes every single year, the vast majority of which cause little to no meaningful damage at all, a simple consequence of the country's location along some of the most seismically active tectonic boundaries on the planet. What separates an earthquake like this one from routine seismic activity isn't just the raw magnitude number, but the specific combination of shallow depth, close proximity to a densely populated area, and unlucky timing. All factors that turned a preliminary 7.1 magnitude reading into a genuinely deadly, structurally destructive event rather than simply another data point in Japan's constant background level of seismic activity. It's worth placing this week's earthquake in context against Japan's more recent seismic history too, beyond just the 2016 Kumamoto sequence, because the country has faced a string of significant earthquakes over the past few years alone. On New Year's Day of 2024, a magnitude 7, 5 earthquakes struck the Noto Peninsula on Japan's western coast, triggering severe shaking, a tsunami of nearly 3 feet, and ultimately claiming at least 64 lives, with property and economic damage estimated to potentially exceed $1 billion. That earthquake, like this week's Kumamoto quake, involved a shallow depth close to populated areas, a combination researchers have specifically compared to the underlying mechanics of both the 2016 Kumamoto sequence and the 1995 Kobe earthquake, distinguishing all three from the fundamentally different, far larger 2011 Tohoku earthquake, a magnitude 9. One megathrust event that produced shaking roughly 250 times stronger than this week's quake and triggered the catastrophic tsunami responsible for the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Understanding that distinction matters, because not every major Japanese earthquake follows the same pattern or carries the same specific risks, and the shallow crustal earthquakes striking directly beneath populated areas, like this week's Kumamoto quake, the 2024 Noto earthquake, and the 2016 Kumamoto sequence, tend to produce concentrated localized devastation, rather than the kind of enormous ocean-spanning tsunami risk associated with a massive offshore megathrust event like 2011. So, what does all of this actually add up to based on what's been confirmed as of right now? A shallow, magnitude 7, 1 earthquake struck southern Japan's Kumamoto prefecture on the afternoon of July 28, 2026, collapsing at least a dozen buildings, triggering a deadly explosion and partial collapse at a crowded shopping mall, and killing at least 18 people so far, with dozens more injured and an unknown number still potentially missing. Japan's government has deployed hundreds of soldiers to assist with relief efforts, confirmed that nearby nuclear facilities remain undamaged, and continues coordinating search and rescue operations through damaged buildings where people remain trapped. Tens of thousands of homes remain without power or running water in the affected region. And for a community that experienced a nearly identical, similarly devastating earthquake sequence back in 2016, this week's disaster represents a painful, direct repeat of a threat local residents understood all too well, arriving again within the span of a single decade. Behind every figure in this story, the death toll, the injury count, the number of homes without power is a specific family or community dealing with the direct, immediate consequences of something that happened without any warning beyond. At best, a few seconds of automated alert before the ground itself started moving. The Vietnamese factory worker killed by a falling crane, the shoppers caught inside a mall when its ceiling gave way, the thousands of families in Yatsushiro and Kashima City who are, as of this recording, still waiting to learn whether their homes are safe to return to, or whether a missing family member has been found. Numbers matter for understanding the scale of an event like this accurately, but it's worth remembering, especially with a story still actively developing, that behind each one of them is a genuinely difficult, ongoing situation for real people, not a statistic to move past quickly on the way to the next headline. Looking ahead, seismologists monitoring the aftermath of this week's earthquake are watching closely for aftershocks, smaller earthquakes that commonly follow a major seismic event as the surrounding fault system continues settling into a new state of stress. The 2016 Kumamoto sequence is itself a stark reminder of why that monitoring matters so much in this specific region since the initial 6. 4 magnitude quake in that sequence was later understood to have been a foreshock for the larger, more destructive 7.1 magnitude quake that followed just over a day later. Japanese seismologists have not indicated that this week's earthquake is expected to follow that same specific pattern, but officials have urged residents in the affected areas to remain cautious and prepared for continued aftershock activity in the days and weeks ahead, particularly given how many structures in the region have already sustained damage that could make them considerably more vulnerable to any additional shaking, even from a comparatively minor aftershock. The recovery process itself, beyond the immediate search and rescue effort, is likely to stretch on for months. Restoring power and water access to the tens of thousands of affected households, repairing critical infrastructure like the bullet train lines and airport operations suspended in the earthquake's immediate aftermath, and eventually rebuilding the collapsed structures across Yatsushiro and Kashima City will all take considerable time and resources, layered on top of the more immediate work of confirming the final death toll and accounting for anyone still reported missing. Japan's own disaster response framework, refined over decades of experience with exactly this kind of event, includes established processes for both emergency relief funding and longer-term reconstruction support, mechanisms that were already being activated in the earthquake's immediate aftermath, even as rescue operations at sites like the Aeon Mall remained the most urgent priority. Given how quickly figures like the death toll, the number of people missing, and the full scope of structural damage tend to change in the days immediately following a major earthquake, it's worth treating every specific number in this story as a snapshot of what was confirmed at the time of reporting, rather than a final, settled count. Officials themselves have been clear that the situation remains actively developing, with search and rescue operations continuing, and the true scale of this disaster likely to become clearer only in the coming days. If stories like this, accurate, sourced, and respectful of what's actually still a developing and painful situation for the people living through it, are what you come here for, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we'll continue following this story as confirmed updates come in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.